Hi everyone, I just wanted to do a quick little video for you to go over today's lesson since we aren't able to meet in our live session today. So today we're going to be reading an excerpt from Oliver Twist. Our goals for the lesson today are we're going to learn a little bit about Charles Dickens, then we're going to read and analyze a segment from Oliver Twist. We will consider how this text answers one of the essential questions from the semester: how is literature influenced by the time in which it's written? So let's go ahead and dive in, right? So who was Charles Dickens? I guarantee you've heard of Charles Dickens, even though you might not think you have. He was an incredibly famous Victorian author. He was born in 1812 and he died in 1870. He really believed that writing could play a big role in fixing the problems of the world, and he really uses his literature to force society to look at some of its shortcomings. And you're going to see this personal influence of Oliver Twist on from his own life. So at the age of 12, his father was forced into a debtor's prison. So as a result, Dickens himself was forced into a workhouse, and that left a profound influence on his life. And if you remember the cartoon you had to look at yesterday, we learned that the poorhouses were an incredibly deplorable place to be in, right? They had limited food, incredibly hard work. It was not exactly an easy place to be, right? So here are some of the books that he has written. His most famous would be A Christmas Carol, and yes, I'm talking about the Christmas Carol with Ebenezer Scrooge and the Marley and Jacob Marley. We have Oliver Twist, Great Expectations, A Tale of Two Cities. You've likely heard of these stories before. So let's dive into one of his most famous works, which is Oliver Twist. So this is a lovely introduction from Amazon, which I think it does a nice way of building up the story. It is a gripping portrayal of London's dark criminal underbelly. The story of Oliver Twist is about an orphan, and he's set upon by evil and adversity from his first breath. And it shocked readers when it was published, most likely because it was about a child. And after running away from the workhouse and pompous beadle, Mr. Bumble, Oliver finds himself lured into a den of thieves, peopled by vivid and memorable characters: the artful Dodger, the vicious burglar Bill Sikes, the dog Bullseye, and prostitute Nancy, all watched over by cunning master thief Fagin. Combining elements of Gothic romance, the Newgate novel, and popular melodrama, Dickens created an entirely new kind of fiction, an scathing indictment of a cruel society, and pervaded by an unforgettable sense of threat and mystery. So much like what William Blake saw and what other romantic authors saw about the treatment of children, so did Dickens, mostly because he experienced it, right? So he writes this novel, and I want you to think about this. Would the novel have had that kind of impact had it been about, say, an adult? It likely wouldn't. But here we are. We're reading the story about a child going into this world of crime. We're reading about a child who is working in this workhouse, and it really made society stop and think about what was that impact, right? So let's go ahead and dive in here. So you are just going to be reading one chapter. We're not gonna be reading the whole book. Like I said, it's kind of this semester is kind of a tasting, and if you like it, then you can read more later on. So as you read through independently, make sure you are looking at these guiding questions, because that's really going to help you think about the purpose of the passage and what the author was achieving here. So let's go ahead and read this. This isn't too terribly long of a passage. The room in which the boys were fed was a large stone hall with a copper at one end, out of which the master, dressed in an apron for the purpose and assisted by one or two women, ladled the gruel at meal times. Of this festive composition each boy had one porringer, and no more, except on occasions of great public rejoicing, when had 2 ounces and a quarter of bread besides. The bowls never wanted washing. The boys polished them with their spoons till they shone again. And when they had performed this operation, which never took long, the spoons being nearly as large as the bowls, they would sit staring at the copper with such eager eyes as if they could have devoured the very bricks of which it was composed, employing themselves meanwhile in sucking their fingers most assiduously, with the view of catching up any stray splashes of gruel that might have been cast thereon. Boys generally have generally excellent appetites. Oliver Twist and his companions suffered the tortures of slow starvation for 3 months. At last they got so ferocious and wild with hunger that one boy, who was tall for his age, hadn't been used to that sort of thing, or his father had kept a small cook shop, hinted darkly to his companions that unless he had another basin of gruel per diem, he was afraid he might some night happen to eat the boy who slept next to him, who happened to be a weakly youth of a tender age. He had a wild, hungry eye, and they implicitly believed him. A council was held, lots were cast, who should walk up to the master after supper that evening and ask for more, and it fell to Oliver Twist. All right, so let's stop and think here for a second. First, notice the word festive. How and why is this out of place, considering the subject matter of the text? So, with what's happening here, is this really a happy environment, or is it more of a solemn event? So think about this. They're not in a good place. They're not happy. So Dickens is definitely being a little sarcastic here with his of a festive composition. He's kind of digging in deep with how solemn the situation is and how each child just is given this very small bowl. Think about it, the spoons were almost as big as the bowls themselves, implying that they weren't getting much food. So think about that word and think about, why is this part so detailed? Think, why does Dickens take the time to paint this picture in our minds? Because I'm sure, as you can see it in your head, these boys who are sitting here just super hungry, licking the bowls and wishing they could have more food, right? And then what happens? You have this boy who's not used to living in these kind of conditions, and he's very desperate, and he threatens to do what? He threatens to eat one of the kids. So if they don't start getting him an extra bowl of porridge a day, so the boys vote, and Oliver Twist is the one who's going to have to ask for more food. So I want you to think about how that's going to go down. The evening arrived. The boys took their places. The master, in his cook's uniform, stationed himself at the copper. His pauper assistants ranged themselves behind him. The gruel was served out, and a long grace was said over the short commons. The gruel disappeared. The boys whispered at each other and winked at Oliver, while his next neighbors nudged him. Child as he was desperate with hunger and reckless with misery. He rose from the table and, advancing to the master, basin and spoon in hand, and said, somewhat alarmed with his own temerity, "Please, sir, I want some more." The master was a fat, healthy man, but he turned very pale. He gazed in stupefied astonishment on the small rebel for some seconds, and then clung for support to the copper. The assistants were paralyzed with wonder, the boys with fear. "What?" said the master at length in a faint voice. "Please, sir," replied Oliver, "I want some more." The master aimed a blow at Oliver's head with the ladle, pinioned him with his arms, and shrieked for the beetle. All right. So, Think about how Dickens builds this moment up. All right. The boys are whispering at each other. They're winking at Oliver. They're nudging their neighbors. They can't wait. He's building that suspense, right? And this child, he's desperate for hunger. He's reckless with misery, but he's going to go up because he is the one who was picked to ask for more food. And then look at this, the master. The master was a fat, healthy man. Now think about the boys who were in this workhouse and and how much food they were given. Now this master, how much food do you think he gets? He's a fat, healthy man, meaning that he's probably got a good amount of food. So he's absolutely shocked. This hungry child wants more food? You ungrateful child! He's shocked and he calls for the beadle, which is basically a police officer, right? And he says, he's ready to hit him. So what statement is Dickens making about social class and how it impacts people's behavior? So obviously the master is in a different social class than Oliver Twist, and he's looking at him with disdain, with shock. He thinks that Oliver is ungrateful. All right, so let's see how this wraps up here. The board were sitting in solemn conclave when Mr. Bumble rushed into the room with great excitement, and addressing the gentleman in the high chair, said, "Mr. Limpkins, I beg your pardon, sir. Oliver Twist has asked for more." There was a general start. Horror was depicted in every countenance. "For more?" said Mr. Limpkins. "Compose yourself, Bumble, and answer me distinctly. Do I understand that he has asked for more after he had eaten the supper allotted by the dietary?" "He did, sir," replied Bumble. "That boy will be hung," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "I know that boy will be hung." Nobody controverted the prophetic gentleman's opinion. An animated discussion took place. Oliver was ordered into instant confinement, and a bill was next morning pasted on the outside of the gate, offering a reward of £5 to anybody who would take Oliver Twist off the hands of the parish. In other words, £5 and Oliver Twist was offered to any man or woman who wanted an apprentice to any trade, business, or calling. "I was never more convinced of anything in my life," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat as he knocked at the gate and read the bill the next morning. "I was never more convinced of anything in my life that I am that boy will come to be hung." So, let's stop and look over this. Everyone, the whole board at the church, is completely shocked that Oliver Twist has asked for more food. And what do? They put him in a confinement where he's not allowed to talk to any more of the kids, and they post a thing on the outside of the church and says, "Anybody can take him. We will pay you $5 to get him out of here." Right? Now, this gentleman here in the white waistcoat says that boy will be hung. This is not literal. He's thinking that this boy is so much trouble that at some point in his life, he's going to live a life of crime because he has the audacity to ask for more food. He questions the status quo. He questions if he can have more food. So think about what Dickens is saying here and how the poor were treated and what impact that would have had on society and the way that they were treating the poor at the time. All right. So a couple of final questions I want you to think about before I wrap up our lesson here. What ideas does Dickens want us to take away from this passage? What is Dickens emphasizing about social class? And why would it be important for Dickens to point out society's flaws? So make sure you reread that section. Look at the notes that are in the margins. And if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much. Bye.